Welcome to Unit 11 of the TESOL course at Southern Utah University. This video will focus on writing skills. We'll talk about reasons to teach writing, about some basic writing skills, and then we'll look at contrasting different approaches to writing instruction, and we'll finish up with a discussion of grammar and writing. Why teach writing? Well, first of all, writing in most cultures equates to respect and influence. When we're literate and we can write, we have the ability to advocate for ourselves and for others, and to communicate about things that are important to us. So helping students learn how to write in a language gives them power within that language culture. Also, writing helps learners notice the language better. So the more they're writing, the more likely they are to start paying attention to how words are formed, and then they can transfer that knowledge to their speaking ability as well. There are studies that show that students who write a lot actually become good speakers. So it's valuable to spend time writing. The other reason to teach writing is that it does not appear to come naturally. Compared with their ability in their first language, when writers write in their second language, or their L2, they do less planning, they have far more errors, and their message is less clear. So we need to help these writers improve their ability to plan and reduce errors and be more clear in writing. And explicit instruction can help with that. When we are dealing with writers who have very minimal or no literacy skills, we've got to do some basic writing instruction. And this can involve things like teaching learners how to handwrite, how to form letters, and that writing in English goes from left to right across the page, top to bottom. Whether we're teaching handwriting or cursive, or whether we're teaching typing on the keyboard, it's a physical skill in addition to a cognitive skill. And we should be thinking about how technology is affecting writing. Technology can make writing easier. It can give suggestions for us, but helping students understand what technological tools they're going to use when they're writing and how that may help or cause problems for them. Many of us are familiar with the idea of autocorrect or typos, and sometimes technology helps with these things, sometimes it creates new problems. So with basic writing instruction, we often focus on mechanics. So how do we form the letters, and teaching them how to form circle-shaped letters, and letters with tails, and letters that go high with straight lines. It's important to practice that and to show and model the good letter formation, where to start and where to end. And if you don't have experience with that, there's lots of great websites you can find out how teachers teach students to form letters. It'd be good to review that and to model that when you write on the board for learners. Also teach them about spelling and punctuation and capitalization. Spelling can seem like a challenge in English, and to many English users it seems like it's just random, but it's not. There are patterns to English spelling. They're just complex because English has been influenced by so many languages. But as you learn these patterns, the majority of English words, probably close to 80 or 90% of English words, follow these regularized patterns. Let's talk about some of these approaches to teaching writing. One of them is the difference between working on macro skills and micro skills. Macro skills are the big parts of language. That's where we get the macro word from. These are things that usually go beyond the sentence level. So when we're talking about macro skills, we're talking about, do you have good content? Do you have a good argument? Is it organized well? So macro skills are an important part of writing. Then we have what are called micro skills. These are the sentence or lower levels. This is things like mechanics, spelling, grammar issues, vocabulary choice, and helping learners improve both their macro skills and their micro skills. And generally, when we're working on a piece of writing with students, it makes more sense to spend time on macro skills earlier on and come back and address micro skills later in the process. Another contrasting approach is writing to learn versus writing to communicate. So are students doing writing activities that are helping them to learn the language and learn what it means to be a writer in English? Or are they doing writing activities where the purpose there is authentic communication? They're communicating with someone in an authentic kind of genre. Sometimes we do writing activities that are not authentic, and no one's expected to learn or no one's expected to communicate or read them except for maybe a teacher giving feedback. And both are valid, but we just need to know that we're doing writing to learn, to practice, but the goal really usually is writing to communicate. Another contrast is product-oriented versus process-oriented. In a product-oriented approach, the focus is on producing a great product. And so we just focus on helping students get that good product any way they can. A process-oriented approach says we're not as concerned about the end result, although we do care. What we care more about is helping the writer develop a good habit and a good process to go through to develop as a writer and to use that process in multiple contexts, no matter what the product is. Here's another way of looking at process writing. Although different writers and different teachers will use different words and sometimes have different minor steps for this cycle, generally it begins with some sort of planning, thinking about what you need to write, who the audience is, and what the content is, and then you would start drafting it. And then after you finish drafting it, you're going to go back and revise it. And sometimes you may go back to the planning again, or maybe at that point you're ready to publish it and send it out. But we need to help learners understand that this is a process and that there's different things they can do during each of these stages to develop themselves as writers, but also develop a better product through this process. Another thing to think about when we work with writers is, especially when we're evaluating them, is to help them develop a writing portfolio. So portfolio is a collection of students' work. And part of a good writing portfolio involves letting students have some control over the selection of samples that end up in their portfolio. So maybe you tell them, here's some parameters, we need to have this kind of writing and this kind of writing, but students then get to select maybe topics, or they get to select their own samples. Maybe they produced 5 different things that fit this criteria, and they can choose the one that they like best or they think best showcases their ability. Another important part of writing portfolios is that they're showing progress over time. So whenever possible, it's helpful to include an early draft and a later draft or an outline so that both the student and maybe the evaluator can see how this person develops a piece of writing. So they can see that process that we just talked about. It's also important usually that writing portfolios include some kind of reflection. And it may be a reflection on the entire portfolio or on particular pieces within the portfolio. And this is really helpful for learners to think about, what is my process? How am I developing as a writer? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And where do I want to go next to continue improving? And reflections also then help evaluators who may look at the portfolio. Another reason why reflections are valuable is that it helps a learner articulate to other people what their abilities are. So if they ever had a job interview or some other situation where they need to defend to other people their writing skills, if they've done a reflection, they've already been thinking about these things, and that will help them to articulate it maybe during an interview, what their ability is as a writer. So reflection is a great way to help language learners become advocates for themselves and defend their language abilities to others. Another way to think about writing is doing genre writing versus doing creative writing. So in genre writing, we're focused on learning different types of texts. So learning how to write a resume or a cover letter, or learning how to write a research report or a personal story. And part of genre writing are some studies that focus on contrastive rhetoric. And what contrastive rhetoric gets into is the idea that different cultures have different perceptions of what is good writing. And we need to understand that, especially when we're teaching academic writing, that students from other cultures may not recognize the way that North American academic community thinks as good writing. And so they may produce something that doesn't match that. And it doesn't mean that it's not good writing, it just means it doesn't fit the cultural community that of what the expectations are. So helping students recognize they may have different expectations depending on what culture they're in can help them make changes that they need to fit the particular culture that they are writing for. Creative writing or self-expression writing doesn't worry so much about what are the rules or expectations of the community. It's more for self and just learning to write for the enjoyment of writing or to express oneself or one's feelings. And there's a place for both kinds of writing, but we need to find out what are the goals of our students and then decide what types of writing will best help them reach those goals. Lastly, we just want to talk briefly about grammar and writing. Historically, writing has been teaching and learning grammar. Now we recognize that there's a lot more to writing than just grammar. But it's still considered an important place to give feedback on grammar because there's this record often of the writing. So it's easier to comment on a student's grammar than it is, say, maybe in their speaking. But we need to make sure that as we're giving feedback, we're doing it in a sensitive way and in a manageable way that the learner can understand it. The graph we have here is trying to represent, if we think along the bottom of the graph, represents the learner's proficiency in the language. And then the left side of the graph going up represents the ability the learner has to learn from grammar instruction and feedback. So what we can see is that when someone is low proficiency in the language, grammar instruction and feedback has almost no impact on them. They just can't process it and use it. But the more proficient they become, the more likely they are to benefit from that grammar instruction. So this helps us think wisely. Should I give feedback to learners? And is it feedback that's appropriate for their level? If it's not, don't even bother. Just get them writing, get them expressing themselves, and wait until writers are maybe a little more proficient and are a little more prepared to handle a particular grammar structure. Then you can start instructing them on it and giving them feedback on it. And it's more likely that they'll learn from it and be able to apply it. So in this video, we talked about reasons to teach writing. We overviewed some basic writing skills and talked about different approaches to writing, including the role of grammar in writing.